You know that feeling when you check your bank app, and you already kind of know what it's going to say, but you check anyway? Like you're standing in front of the fridge at 11:47 p.m., opening it again, even though you already checked it 6 minutes ago, and it's still just mustard, sadness, and a questionable leftover container that might be pasta or might be a science project. And it's not even always that you're broke. Sometimes you're paying bills. Rent's covered. You can buy groceries without doing mental gymnastics. But there's this low hum of stress in the background. A constant little buzz. Because you know one weird week could mess everything up. Car makes a noise? Cool. That's $900 you don't have. Tooth starts hurting? Awesome. That's a surprise bill plus a side quest of panic. Work cuts hours? Now you're doing that thing where you stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m. and start calculating how long you could survive off the random stuff in your pantry. And honestly, I've been there. I mean, not like I lived off ramen for 12 years and fought raccoons for Wi-Fi level, but I've absolutely had that era where you're technically functioning, but you're one inconvenience away from spiraling. And I'm Nick. Yeah, I know, classic finance guy name, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people build wealth like it's inevitable, while other people feel like they're sprinting on a treadmill that's slightly on fire. And here's what's weird. People talk about your first 100K or your first million, like those are the big turning points. But the first 25,000 changes something deeper than your bank balance. It doesn't just move numbers around. It changes your relationship with money. It changes how you sleep, how you plan, how you choose, how you react. And today I want to walk you through why your first 25,000 changes everything, and why it's also harder than you think. Like, not just budget better, hard, but psychologically, emotionally, identity level hard. And if you stick with me, I think you'll leave with a completely different way of looking at that number, not as a finish line, but as the moment your life stops being ruled by fragility. Because that's the real shift. Not rich. Not finally made it. Just not fragile anymore. Let's start with what 25,000 is not. It's not a Lamborghini down payment. It's not quit your job money for most people. It's not I never have to think again money, unfortunately, because if that existed, I would already be there, and I'd be filming this video from a floating hammock. The reason 25,000 changes everything is because it buys something you can't see on your bank statement. It buys distance. Distance from emergencies. Distance from desperation. Distance from I have to say yes to this horrible thing because I have no other option. And once you have distance, your decisions change. Here's a tiny example. Imagine two people. Same income. Same bills. Person A has 600 in the bank. Person B has 25,000. Their car breaks down. 1,200 repair. Person A doesn't just have a car problem. Person A now has a life problem. Because where does it come from? Credit card? Payment plan? Borrowing? Skipping rent? Asking family? Selling stuff? Calling out of work because transportation is shot? It's a domino chain. Person B has an annoying inconvenience. That's it. Just. Ugh. A sigh, not a crisis. And that gap, that difference between sigh and crisis, is where your life starts to change. It's also why emergency savings are constantly recommended in the 3 to 6 months of expenses range, because the goal isn't just money sitting there. The goal is stability, vanguard, fidelity. And when you're stable, you stop making short-term, fear-based decisions. Which matters because fear-based decisions are expensive. Not just financially, emotionally too. Takeaway: don't think of 25,000 as a pile of cash. Think of it as distance from chaos. When you're saving, you're not saving for nothing. You're saving for the ability to handle life without collapsing. Okay. Let's talk about why this is harder than it sounds. Because people hear, save 25,000, and they think the challenge is math. Like, okay, I'll cut Starbucks, I'll meal prep, I'll stop buying little treats. And sure. Fine. But the real reason most people struggle is psychological. It's what I call scarcity brain. Scarcity brain is what happens when you don't have enough buffer. Your mind narrows. It zooms in on immediate survival. It becomes obsessed with the next bill, the next fee, the next. Oh no. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you're dumb. It's that your brain is trying to protect you. And there's research showing that financial stress is tied to factors like savings, buffers, and debt. Basically, how close you are to the edge affects how stressed you feel. Science direct. And it makes sense, right? If you're walking a tightrope, you don't stop to admire the clouds. You stare at your feet and hope you don't fall. That's what living without savings feels like. And here's the cruel part. Scarcity brain makes you worse at building savings. Because you're constantly reacting. You're constantly putting out fires. You're constantly fixing the month. And every time you fix the month with a credit card, or a loan, or borrowing, you're basically renting your own future. So when people say, "Why don't you just save?" It's like telling someone who's drowning, "Have you tried not drowning?" Small story. I had a friend, smart, hardworking, not reckless, who kept getting hit with these 200, 800 problems. Not huge, but frequent. Tires, pet bill, dentist, random travel for family stuff. And every single one went on a card. Not because he loved debt. Because he didn't have margin. And then the interest started eating him alive. Which is also why credit card APRs being in the 20+ range is such a big deal. You're not just paying for the purchase, you're paying for the lack of buffer. Experian Investopedia. Why it matters to you, if you feel like you keep resetting to zero. You're not alone. That's the scarcity loop. And 25,000 is often the number where the loop starts breaking, not because it's magic, but because it's enough to create margin. Takeaway: if you're building toward 25,000, don't just focus on the budget. Focus on building margin fast, even if it's ugly at first, extra shifts, selling and used stuff, temporary lifestyle tightening. Scarcity brain calms down when it sees proof. Let me say something that sounds dramatic but is kind of true. Most people aren't stressed because they don't have money. They're stressed because they don't have options. And options come from liquidity. From cash. From reserves. There's this stat from the Federal Reserve's shed data showing how many adults would cover a 400 emergency with cash or cash equivalents. And it's basically a national snapshot of fragility. Federal Reserve. And I'm not bringing that up to be like, look how bad it is. I'm bringing it up because if you struggle with this, it's not a personal moral failing. It's common. It's structural. It's expensive out there. So where does 25,000 land? For a lot of people, 25,000 is roughly a real emergency fund plus a life happens buffer plus enough to stop panicking when something breaks, and that's why it changes everything. Because panic is a tax. Panic makes you pick the first solution, not the best solution. Panic makes you accept bad terms. Panic makes you tolerate bad jobs longer. Panic makes you stay in situations you've outgrown. When you have 25,000, you don't become fearless. But you become slower. And slow decisions are usually better decisions. Story/example. Imagine you're offered a job. It pays a little more, but it's sketchy. Weird vibe. High turnover. You can feel it. If you have 800 in the bank, you might take it because you can't afford to be picky. If you have 25,000, you might say no, or you might negotiate. Or you might wait 2 weeks for a better offer. That's the power. Takeaway: your goal isn't to save money. Your goal is to buy the ability to make decisions without adrenaline in your bloodstream. Let's talk about the emotional reality. Saving 25,000 can feel like you're carrying water in your hands. You scoop it up, and then life leaks it out through your fingers. And this is where people quit. Because the progress is invisible at first. When you go from 0 to 1,000, it's life-changing, but it doesn't feel like it should be. When you go from 1,000 to 5,000, you start to feel slightly safer, but also slightly more aware of how unsafe you were. When you go from 5,000 to 10,000, you feel proud, and then immediately your brain goes, cool. Still not enough. And then you're aiming at 25,000, and it's like staring at a mountain. And the mountain doesn't care how motivated you are. It just sits there. This is the part where I need to gently call out something. A lot of people underestimate how much of early wealth building is boring and delayed. There's no applause. No fireworks. You're just making slightly better decisions over and over until your life changes. Which is why so many finance YouTube videos lean on motivational quotes like Charlie Munger's famous idea that the first big chunk is the hardest. Because after that, momentum and compounding start helping you Investopedia. Now, Munger talked about 100K, but the psychological principle shows up way earlier. 25,000 is often the first time momentum becomes real for normal people. Why it matters? If you're feeling like it's taking forever, that's not a sign you're failing. That's a sign you're in the hardest phase, the push the boulder phase. Actionable advice: pick a smaller checkpoint inside 25,000 that actually changes your life. 1,000. I can handle a minor emergency. 5,000. I can absorb a hit. 10,000. I have breathing room. 25,000. I'm not fragile. Celebrate checkpoints. Not because you're done, but because your brain needs proof that progress is real. This part is sneaky. Because money milestones aren't just financial. They're identity milestones. When you hit your first 25,000, you start believing a sentence that used to feel fake. I'm the kind of person who can build money. And I know that sounds like motivational poster nonsense. I hate motivational poster nonsense. I really do. But identity is powerful. Before 25,000, a lot of people feel like savings is something they attempt, and then fail at. They think of it like dieting. Like, I'm good for 2 weeks, then I mess up. And the moment you hit 25,000, you've proven something to yourself. You can delay gratification. You can follow a plan. You can survive without spending everything you earn. You can recover from setbacks and still move forward. That's not just finance. That's character building. And it spills over. You become more confident negotiating salary. You become more willing to learn investing basics. You become less tempted by dumb status spending because you've tasted real stability. A quick aside, have you noticed how people who are broke are often pressured to look successful? Like the cheapest way to feel powerful is to buy the symbol of power. But once you actually have some stability, you don't need the symbol as much. Because you're not trying to convince yourself anymore. Takeaway: don't underestimate the identity win. Track your savings like you're tracking a streak. Not to be obsessive, but to build the story. I do what I say I'll do. Here's where people get tripped up. They think, first 25,000 is one bucket. But in real life, it's usually 3 buckets pretending to be one number. Bucket 1, emergency fund, true emergencies, job loss, medical, major repairs. Bucket 2, life friction fund, car tires, plane tickets, random fees, the stuff that always happens. Bucket 3, opportunity fund, courses, moving for a better job, starting a side hustle, investing. If you put all 25,000 into one pile and don't label it mentally, you'll either spend it too easily. Well, it's there. Or never touch it even when you should. I'm terrified to lose it. Both are problems. So what you want is psychological clarity. Even if it's in one high-yield savings account, you can still label it. First 10K equals emergency only, next 5K equals life friction, final 10K equals opportunities/investing seed money. Now, do you need 25,000 before investing? Not necessarily. But having a strong buffer often prevents you from panic selling investments or going into debt when life hits. And that's the whole point: stability first. Sources for the buffer idea: the 3 to 6 months expenses. Emergency fund guidance is widely used because it creates that baseline stability. Vanguard fidelity. Takeaway: make your $25,000 feel like a system, not a pile. Systems are easier to protect and easier to use correctly. Alright. Let's be practical. Because just save more is not advice. That's a fortune cookie with a bank account. Here's what actually tends to work, and I'll keep it real. 1. Automate the boring part. If saving depends on willpower, you're going to lose. Not because you're weak, because you're human. Auto transfer on payday into savings. Even if it's 50. And if you can, put it somewhere slightly annoying to access. Not impossible. Just annoying. 2. Attack the biggest leak first. People love cutting small stuff because it's emotionally easy. But the big wins are usually housing, car costs, subscriptions, and recurring payments. Eating out habit, not once, the pattern. Ramit Sethi talks a lot about systems and automation as the foundation. Less frugality Olympics. More. Set it up once. I will teach you to be rich. 3. Use temporary intensity. This is the underrated tactic. Most people try to save $25,000 with a forever plan. That's exhausting. Instead, do a 90-day sprint. No restaurants, no impulse spending. Sell 10 things, pick up one extra income stream temporarily, then return to normal, but at a higher baseline. 4. Don't build savings while bleeding 20+ interest. If you have high-interest credit card debt, you're trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. Given how high average APRs can run, paying it down is often the best return you can get. Experian Investopedia. Takeaway: automate savings. Fix the big leaks. Use short sprints. And eliminate high-interest debt so your progress sticks. Here's the twist nobody warns you about. Sometimes when people hit 25,000, they get uncomfortable. Because they're not used to having money. They feel guilty. Or they feel paranoid. Or they think, well, I deserve a reward. And then reward themselves right back down to 12,000. And look, rewards are fine. But your first 25,000 is a fragile new identity. It's a baby deer. You don't throw a baby deer into traffic and go, good luck. You protect it. Because once you've had stability, losing it feels worse than never having it. That's basic human psychology. Loss hurts more than gain feels good. Loss aversion is a core idea in behavioral finance. U.S. News. So what should you do when you hit it? You should do something boring, keep going, but slower. Lock in habits. Refine your system. Start learning investing calmly. Increase your income if you can. And don't rush to upgrade your life the second you finally have breathing room. Because the breathing room is the upgrade. Takeaway: when you hit 25,000, treat it like a new baseline, not a lottery win. Stability is the prize. So yeah, your first 25,000 changes everything. Not because it turns you into a different person overnight, and not because it makes you rich. It changes everything because it changes what your life feels like. It turns emergencies into inconveniences. It turns panic into problem solving. It turns, I hope nothing goes wrong, into, I can handle it if it does. And if you're still on the way there, I just want you to hear this. The reason it feels so hard is because it is hard. You're not just saving money, you're fighting scarcity brain. You're building margin in a world that keeps trying to consume it. You're changing your identity from someone who gets by to someone who builds. And that's slow. That's boring sometimes. That's frustrating. And it's also one of the most powerful things you can do for your future self. Because once you hit that 25,000 mark, you start living from a place of stability instead of fragility. And from there, everything gets easier, not effortless, not magical, but easier in the way that matters. You get to choose. So keep going. Not because you're behind. Not because you need to hustle harder to prove something. But because every dollar you stack is another inch of distance between you and chaos. And honestly, that's a pretty good reason.